Hey, this is take one of my ramble about DuneRider and HomeKids. I've noticed something over the years concerning my stories, especially the ones I want to make into comics one day. And that's how each story, the ones that have held pivotal positions throughout the years, have reflected my values or something I felt the world needed at the time of their creation. Obit was a story about an outcast who, through one person giving him a chance and changing his perspective, gained valuable friendships. At the time of me writing it, it reflected a similar experience of mine where one friend changed my whole perspective and helped drag me out of self-loathing misery into nihilistic self-loathing misery. But I'd rather not care than to care too much, since the former has historically proven better for me than the latter. The Rejects Club was heavily themed around friends and community, sparking from my high school freshman desire to be back with all of my chaotic friends and classmates from middle school, whose mindsets I respected a lot more than those I met or re-met in high school, unfortunately. During the national lockdown, I had several stories, one of which was 3D, aka 3 Demons, which I have made shit for on this channel before, that focused on school life and being back in a classroom with classmates. Others at various points have been romance-oriented, reflecting my fluctuation in my feelings towards romantic relationships. Some ended in let's just be friends, while others were a whole journey where the main characters and everyone else ended up in their respective couples. Shark, which was the story that inspired Infi, my persona, was going to illustrate word for word the god-awful experience I had with an ex-friend of mine, highlighting how the system really doesn't do jack shit for victims, nor does it actually provide any mental help or intervention to the perpetrators. Whereas Murked, my apocalyptic comic, reflected my intense desire for the world to literally just stop existing. DuneRider and HomeKids are quite interesting on this front too. DuneRider, which I created during the lockdown, only really served as the ultimate filler comic, something I wrote during a point in my life where I didn't have any strong ideas for anything, something I later expanded on as I really enjoyed the concept, and eventually overhauled for a class project where a good percentage of the feedback was positive. But it honestly only served as a story where I could see it becoming an anime. A story that took inspiration from anime such as My Hero Academia or Skate the Infinity, as well as webcomics such as Skate Fire 100. Around the time I overhauled it for my project, HomeKids, which at the time was called Cade's Story, lately I've been hung up on my caviars, was like 2 months into production, and had a chokehold on my maladaptive daydreams. I shoved it into the same universe as DuneRider, exterminated the magic system with a flamethrower, and started the third biggest overhaul of DuneRider's existence, one that is still ongoing 2 years later. HomeKids, just like DuneRider, was made out of inspiration from My Hero Academia. Yeah, I can't quite seem to get that universe out of my head. I love the world, but I will say that I'm stuck at like season 4, and I don't plan to watch the plot unfold anytime soon. Cade wasn't actually the main character of that headverse I created. He was a side character that was a homeless graffiti artist and had some interactions with some of the main cast. But I ended up becoming invested with his side plot and started fleshing the fuck out of his character. Once I eradicated the magic system, the quirk system, out of DuneRider, and by extension Cade's shiny new story, I had to come up with an explanation for his mouse stitches. And surprise, surprise, I actually had a really fucked up backstory for both him and his little sister to experience that could perfectly explain the mouse stitches. It's actually just a result of Cade getting a facial scar from fighting a mofo on the street, which he got a tattoo to cover, while his little sister Rennie did the same to make him feel less bad about it. So by proxy, the backstory explains a little bit of the mouse stitches thing, but the backstory, which is kind of just the beginning of the plot, to be honest, and the resulting plot all tackled pretty serious situations and socioeconomic inequalities that are commonly seen and promptly ignored in American, specifically the US, society. That's quite the thematic turn from the lighthearted anime material of DuneRider's story. And as such, there were very different demands that the two stories imposed on me. DuneRider, which was a light, sports-centered coming-of-age comic, asked for fictional and bright characters, people who looked stylistically creative and obviously different from those that you'd meet in real life. HomeKids, the grungy, dark coming-of-age counterpart, demanded characters that looked like people. Some of these characters look like someone you could run into on the street. Hell, you may even know a mofo who looks like one of the graffiti artists or homeless folks I designed for the story. Obviously, there are still a lot of very fictional looking characters, at least in the beginning, but many of them go through very real experiences, which adds a level of depth I never got around to adding into DuneRider. When I initially revised DuneRider for my digital arts class, I expected and was confronted with critique that my characters weren't very diverse. The explanation for this was that I could only choose 6 out of the 24 to 30 characters that I had for the story, and I just chose the first 6 that were introduced in the beginning. And these 6 just so happened to not include many of the diverse roster of characters that were going to be crucial parts of the story later on. But it is incredibly true that I never really considered race, ethnicity, or nationality of many of the characters I write into my stories. Likely, a big part of it is because of the section of Southern California where I live in. It's actually pretty diverse. California, as it stands now, is one of the most, if not the most diverse states in the US. I did, in fact, have to learn that the fact I can say I've never really noticed me or any of my friends or classmates being overtly discriminated against, and in a way that we couldn't ignore because of our race, is something that is incredibly unique to our region, our local area, and likely our entire school district. But it is also partially because of the parameters of the story. Some, such as Obit, Three Demons, or DuneRider, took place in fictional worlds that did not, in fact, have countries or races or the same level of inequality that is present in our reality. And I really didn't plan to write socioeconomic issues into my stories. That is until HomeKids. HomeKids was about the first story where I had to consider the implications of race. What kind of experiences would a character like Dala have to go through because of her skin color or her identity as a woman? What about Taiga? How is the fact that she's this world's equivalent of white going to affect her mindset, actions, how people treat her in relation to Dala? Cade and Rennie, my two main characters, are incredibly similar to one another due to their experiences and their relationship as siblings. They act like each other, look like each other, wear the same clothes, yet they are treated and perceived incredibly differently. I think a big reason why I'm even able to consider stuff to this small of a level, where in previous stories it's been so difficult to even consider the relationships of two characters that exist in the same place at the same time, is because shortly after creating HomeKids, I was thrust into college where I took classes that call out the exact inequalities that I'm looking to write about. Housing inequality, racial inequality, job inequality, gender inequality, disability and sex and immigration status, and everything down to how a bitch dresses and how me using the word bitch could have brought up the mental image of a woman depending on who you are. Ultimately, it has been for the better. Not only do I have a much clearer picture of the reality of the US and how incredibly racist and sexist it is, as well as how incredibly fucking poor the large majority of us are, I also feel like I've unlocked a lot of storytelling potential. HomeKids feels real while staying fictional. Some characters are more realistic in their design or backstory than others. Compared to DuneRider, this story is a whiplash. The kids of DuneRider, if introduced to the kids of HomeKids, would be like me, having to learn that they are extremely privileged to grow up in the environment that they did. That they can even worry about the shit that concerns them. To expand on why this is good, I've been slowly revisiting my character roster for DuneRider and have been redesigning a few here and there. With HomeKids needing accurate diversity, there's a lot more character design inspiration I can grab from just observing the people around me, and Though that wasn't really anything new to me, as with Shark, Merked, and the Rejects Club, I've been taking inspo from real people. It's definitely leveled up the kinds of people I can draw. This includes playing around with face shapes, to accurate hairstyles, to adding little details like a birthmark, heterochromia, facial hair, scars, piercings, and tattoos. Of course, this was all stuff that I've kind of been doing before HomeKids, but they were often one-off characters of stories I never ended up continuing, or they were literally not part of any story, and or had some other explanation for their design, such as Rio's vitiligo being a way to show that he's an African wild dog. DuneRider has been quite neglected in my obsession with HomeKids, but mostly because I have only a vague idea of where I want the plot to go. I can tell with my recent redesigns, though, that by revisiting the story and revamping the characters even more, that I'll eventually achieve the same level of depth. Something I almost forgot to mention that was that through fleshing out HomeKids, I've also been able to do quite a bit of world building for DuneRider, since they do share the same universe. I initially did a little bit of world building for DuneRider, but it was mostly deciding that this world would be a slightly futuristic alternate reality where hoverboards exist and are popular enough to have a whole professional races and such dedicated to them. And also fleshing the magic system down a toilet. DuneRider takes place in a nation called Gashi, whereas HomeKids takes place in a nation called Marva. If these words mean anything, I wouldn't know. I did look them up and nothing significant came up, so I'm assuming they're okay. Marva is very much like the US as it is in reality, where we stand now, with a big portion of its citizens poor and segregated, and where high tech is really only accessible to those rich enough to afford it. Gashi, on the other hand, reflects the most developed and technologically advanced areas of East Asian countries, mixed with a bit of Cyberpunk 2077 for the excess neon and Big Hero 6 for the wholesome side of tech. Because of how diverse HomeKids is, there's also Huelco, Ushuaia, Buflon, Hathan, and the Ecrines, each representing a different region that has a real-world counterpart. This bleeds into DuneRider, as not every character is the equivalent of Asian in the story. There are hoverboarders from Hathan, ones from Marva, and many characters who are of mixed heritage. I love exploring these different regions and their respective cultures, dragging in shit from real life and such, and I love that by working on a story I'm obsessed with, that I can also build a solid foundation for a second story that desperately needs help. With the sheer amount of ideas I have, blame my maladaptive daydreaming, I decide on what I want to tell based on whether or not I revisited the world to add to it or tack on another story to the universe. Obit, for example, was actually built upon a pre-existing universe whose main story was the origin of my channel's name. Before Dear Girl Luuchay, we used to have anime character ripoff Luuchay, the past tense Spanish word for I fought. The Rejects Club is still the original story, but I created West End slums during the lockdown, which is also now getting workshopped to be called something different. DuneRider was a story I felt I would either tell early on or a lot later than my other comic ideas, because I loved the concept, but I had no plans for it. Enter HomeKids, and boom, the universe is now way more complex than the originating story made it. At the expense of me now writing 2 stories at the same time, that is. Falling in love with the universe, the character designs, and the story like this is something fucking magical. I literally cannot wait to draw more for this world, and ideas for story aspects just come so fluidly to me. Before writing this script, I was actually writing a position paper, which is basically an argumentative paper for one of my classes, and though I was passionate about the topic, I only managed to write the introduction and conclusion. Then I swapped over to this script and typed up 5, almost 6 pages in one sitting. At the time that I was writing this script, by the time that I finished it, it was 3 a.m. It was almost 3 a.m. Right now, it's 2 days later. It's not 3 a.m., thankfully. But anyways, I just wanted to make that known. I hope to info dump more about HomeKids and DuneRider and all the stories I'm passionate about in future videos. But if you want to see that, you'll have to stick around for that. Thank you so much for sitting through all this and listening to me ramble. Hope you have a lovely day.